Hello, Johnny from Eurogamer here, and this is Dark Souls the board game. Or rather, this is the lid for Dark Souls the board game. The game itself is actually still strewn across my table. But either way, it is finally here. Is it any good? I'm going to tell you. Let's start with the basics. What's inside the box, and what's the game actually like? The first thing you should know about Dark Souls the board game is that it is big and it is heavy. The core set alone is over 3 kilograms, in fact, which is more than 7 pounds to any Americans watching. Now, given this is a board game representation of Dark Souls, a famously challenging video game, you might find yourself wondering how soon you're going to be contemplating the words, "You died." Immediately is the answer. Pop the lid and you'll be confronted with a covering piece of paper that says simply, "You died." Encouraging start then. The rest of the box's contents goes like this. There's a tray with all the cards you'll need to play the game, the all-important rulebook, 2 cardboard boxes, and then a series of boards. These boards are the ones you'll be using to make up the game map, but they also contain character cards and tokens for you to pop out and use. As a result, although the game is a bit of a snug fit when it's new, you can expect a bit of space to open up once you've popped out all the tokens and put them in bags. Anyway, onto the boxes. The smaller of the two contains 2 sets of dice, which will be explained in due course, and 2 trays of miniatures. These trays contain your sentinels, Silver Knight Swordsman, Silver Knight Great Bowman, hollow soldiers, large hollow soldiers, crossbow hollows, and then the 4 player character miniatures, which are easily identifiable from their different colour plastic. The second larger box contains a bag of markers, some plastic components to make boss health dials, and then the 6 most impressive pieces in the box, the main and mini boss miniatures, these being the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, Dragon Slayer Ornstein, Executioner Smaug, the Boreal Outrider Knight, the Gargoyle, the Winged Knight, and finally the Titanite Demon. And all of it gives a bloody strong impression. Dark Souls the board game is a really impressive package with some very faithfully recreated components, but of course the real question is this: is it any good? The short answer is yes. Dark Souls is a board game that manages to capture the spirit of going over the same encounters in order to get stronger without being tedious or unfair. The sense of escalation as the difficulty of the encounters increases is a really nice touch, but, as per the Souls games themselves, it's the boss battles that truly shine. I'll get on to exactly why that is in just a minute, but first, here's a rough idea of how Dark Souls the board game plays out mechanically. You start out with a class and a fairly standard set of gear, and then you start exploring the tiles that make up the game board. Entering each room triggers an encounter from which you can't run until either your enemies are vanquished or one of the people on your team falls in battle. Each player turn, one of your party gets to move and attack. However, on each enemy turn, all of your enemies attack, meaning they get far more opportunities to deal out damage than you as individuals get. They even get the first go on every encounter, so Dark Souls the board game very quickly teaches you that learning to block, absorb, or dodge incoming damage is far more important than dishing it out. Sound familiar? It should do. As in Dark Souls, balancing your health and stamina is also crucially important. Overreaching and spending stamina has its rewards, but it also adds little black cubes to the left side of your endurance bar. Taking damage, meanwhile, adds little red cubes to the right side of your endurance bar. If the bar fills up entirely, you die. It creates a nice amount of attention between being an effective combatant and not leaving yourself exhausted and open to a deadly counterattack. Try not to worry about this too much, however, because if you do successfully complete an encounter, all of those cubes immediately go away. You can also banish them on your turn with an Estus flask, if you've got one. Assuming it was a standard encounter and not a boss fight, you'll also earn 2 souls per player. All of these go into a central pool and can be spent on buying new gear and levelling up character stats. It's a tricky balancing act, to be honest. We frequently found ourselves buying new gear only to discover that nobody had the stats to use it, which was really frustrating, because getting to level up and put on better gear is immensely rewarding.
Oh, I hope it's for me.
I hope it's for you.
I hope it's for me.
It's a golden wing crest shield. It's not for me.
What does it do?
It's for Matt.
Yeah, is it good? Can I use it?
Yeah. No, you would have to level up your strength twice.
Whoa! Put it in
And
the
your
inventory.
faith once.
Okay.
The quality of your gear is reflected in the colour of the dice you roll, with blue and orange dice offering you more successes than the standard black dice. Rolling these improved dice makes you feel really, really powerful, and it also makes a massive difference to your survivability and your combat effectiveness. Moreover, our lack of decent gear also helped lead to a point whereby our successes left us underprepared. By fluke or skill, we managed to take out the first 3 encounters without anybody dying, but also nobody managed to acquire a better weapon or really level up their stats in a meaningful way. Nonetheless, we were feeling pretty confident as we charged into the next encounter, which kicked the difficulty up a notch. Then we got slaughtered. Twice.
Die!
Oh
You
no.
died!
Eventually we managed to do the room and that felt great, but still, the lesson was clear. Farming souls is as important in Dark Souls the board game as it is in Dark Souls the video game. Luckily the encounters are a lot of fun, so going over them again doesn't really feel like much of a hassle. As you grow more familiar with both the enemies and the player characters, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, you develop strategies that help you minimise the risk of death while dealing with the enemies swiftly. And it's here that the pretty generous movement rules really come into their own. Under several circumstances, Dark Souls is quite happy for you to pick which square enemies are going to move onto, which in turn helps you decide which of your party is going to suffer the next attack. At first, this felt like cheating. To be honest, it still kind of feels to me a bit like cheating. However, we checked and rechecked the rules, and that's simply how it plays. Under certain circumstances, you can finesse the positioning of the miniatures in the Dark Souls board game to suit your requirements, and there's no penalty for doing so. It's effectively an AI exploit, but it forms one of the main pillars of strategy in this particular board game. It may feel strange, but it's nonetheless extremely effective. As I mentioned earlier though, it's the boss battles that really make Dark Souls something special. To be honest, they are probably the most faithful recreation of what a video game boss battle can feel like I've ever encountered in a board game. In other cooperative games like Eldritch Horror or Darkness Comes Rattling, these boss battles feel pretty abstract. The bosses you face are ersatz entities, comprised of a string of the same challenges you've been attempting the whole way through, only the stakes are a little higher. In Dark Souls, however, you really feel like you're in amongst it, helped immeasurably, no doubt, by the fact your miniatures are all circling and stalking a giant, monstrous figurine. The bosses in Dark Souls behave differently to the other enemies in that they have a deck of behaviour cards from which you draw. These determine which attack is coming up on the next turn, and crucially and brilliantly, however, once you run out of cards, you don't shuffle them, you just flip them so that they do the same attacks in the same order over again. So the whole boss battle becomes this desperate fight where you're trying to get into the right position because you know what attacks are coming up next and where the boss is going to be vulnerable, so you can get in position and attack them to the greatest effect. Suddenly your positioning and your memory skills and knowing who's going to be in the firing line next turn becomes all important, and rushing in to deal 2, 3 or 4 points of damage to a boss and then seeing that you're totally safe from its next attack is a tremendous feeling. I'll admit, when I first saw the Dark Souls board game announced, I wasn't convinced they could actually translate the experience of fighting a Souls boss to a tabletop game, but I'm happy to say I was very, very wrong about that point. So Dark Souls the board game does an excellent job of taking the good bits from the video game and translating them elegantly into nice tabletop play, which is fantastic, but how taxing is it to actually learn? Or play for that matter? Well, thankfully, as I already mentioned, the actual gameplay itself ticks along quite nicely. The encounters are sufficiently dynamic, as is visiting the bonfire and levelling up. Once you're comfortable with how the game plays, it runs very smoothly. Setup isn't too taxing, given how much space the game takes up and how many pieces there are, although building the treasure deck at the start of the game is a bit of a faff.
It's not these ones, not these. Oh, there are some more there.
Simply put, there are a lot of little cards to sift through, sort and shuffle, especially if you aren't playing with a full 4-player team, and frankly, that part was pretty tedious. After that, however, it was more or less plain sailing. For reference, I played my first game of Dark Souls with my friends Matt and Joe, who are among my most experienced board game friends. We pride ourselves on picking things up quickly, in other words. Of course, it was our first game, and so we were stopping to consult the rules fairly frequently, but even taking that into account, the 90 to 120 minute playtime printed on the side of the box seems way, way off. Factor in player death, restarting at the bonfire, and, of course, soul farming, and you're definitely looking at a few hours playtime here at least. It's enjoyable playtime, and it certainly feels like it moves along at a decent clip, but going through an entire set of encounters, then a mini-boss, then more encounters, then a proper boss, is definitely more than 2 hours work. Then again, to be honest, if you're shelling out for a game with this many miniatures and component parts, you probably already knew you were in for a lengthy ride. But thankfully, while this isn't a short game, I certainly don't begrudge Dark Souls that extra time. The whole experience is really pretty elegant. The rulebook is very well set out, making it a relatively easy game to pick up, and the gameplay makes both the moments of triumph and crushing defeat really, really enjoyable. So that is Dark Souls the board game. It does a better job of translating what makes the Souls games so good into a tabletop setting than I could have possibly imagined, to be honest, and it does so in a well-crafted and really stylish way. It's not afraid to cut you to ribbons, mind, but if you keep your wits about you, you should be alright. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do let me know. I would love to do more stuff like this, and your feedback is very much appreciated. If you'd like to see some more stuff from Eurogamer, there should be some videos flying about my head right now, and if you would like to like and subscribe, that would be delightful as well. There is no pressure, however. Either way, thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely day.